Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. So glad to have you with us. And as you all are coming in, please put in the chat where you're coming from. We'd love to know if you can put in your city and state. I know we have people coming from all over the country, so love to just say hi and meet you in the chat. So go ahead and get started there with that. My name is Alexandra Alvarado. I'm the Director of Marketing and Education here at the American Apartment Owners Association. And today we have back with us one of our favorite guests, Scott Varney. He's a capital gains tax strategist. He's going to be going over quite a bit of strategies, actually more than just the 1031, which I know we've all heard about. There's actually many more ways that you can defer capital gains. So we're excited to always hear Scott's update. He's always, out in the market looking for new strategies. So that's why we always have him come back. But before I hand it off to Scott, just want to say a couple things. We are recording this as usual. We will be sending everyone the recording tomorrow. So look for your email tomorrow. You will get the recording as well as Scott's information and the slides. So again, keep an eye out for that email. Also, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions, make sure to put them in that Q&A box, not the chat. So we just had you put in your city and state in the chat. But for questions, we want to make sure we do those in the Q&A box instead so that we can keep good track of them. And I'm sure, as you always do, you'll have many questions. We get a lot of questions from our AAOA members. Also, just a few brief things about Scott, although I'm sure he'll give a more thorough introduction. He is a capital gains tax strategist for SV Consultants. He has a long history in real estate and financial services, and he really helps our members and his clients to come up with a strategy that makes sense for them. And I think that's really useful. So, Scott, I'm going to hand it off to you to go over your bio and then the strategies from there.
All right. Thank you, Alexandra, as always. It's always a blessing and a treat to present for AAOA, and I'm always promoting your organization because I believe it is so strong. My name again is Scott Varney. I'm a capital gains and income tax strategist. I do a few income tax strategies. I am not a CPA and I'm not an attorney. I'm not smart enough to be either one of those, but that I do train them all the time, which is kind of funny. So I've been in this space I'm in my ninth year doing that. I've been licensed for real estate in Texas since 1996, where for a time there I was closing 50 to 61 clients a year. So I ran like a madman. And but I just do referrals now. I do enjoy working with real estate professionals and their clients. I'm also licensed for life and long-term care insurance as well as annuities. So how I operate my business. When it comes to sales, there seems to be two types of professionals. There are the professionals that try to make the client fit their product or their solution. And they're trained to overcome objections. And sometimes they're the people that drive us nuts because they're always trying to close, close, close. And but in my world, I work with those one-trick ponies, those specialists, because they're very good at what they do. And then there are those that try to find a product or solution that's out there that fit the client and their needs. And that's how I operate my business. By the way, there is no minimum net worth required for someone to set up a free consultation with me. I talk to people that have a $15,000 tax bill and depending on where they're at in the country, and they're panicking about that, and we can talk that through. I have clients that are worth hundreds of millions. So I have the broad spectrum out there. So don't feel like you're not worthy of my time. You are. And it's a free consultation. So abuse my time. Use and abuse my time. I'm glad to help. Even if I can't help you with a type of strategy, I'm glad to be a blessing and maybe give you some insights or direction. Disclaimer, like you always see. While this is general information about various capital gains tax strategies and some income tax strategies, it does not constitute legal advice. The best way to get guidance on your specific legal issue is to contact an attorney. Now, if you leave this webinar overwhelmed and confused again, you're normal. There is a lot of information here, a lot of options that people don't know about. I want you to leave here realizing that you do not have to be stuck in a 1031 exchange system of thinking where you either do a 1031 exchange or you pay the tax. That's how most real estate investors are trained, and they don't have to be stuck in that system of thinking. Here's a couple of great quotes that I really like. In America, there are two tax systems, one for the informed and one for the uninformed. Both are legal. Judge Learned Hand. Now, you may be about to step from the uninformed to the informed. Another great quote. The biggest scam in life is paying taxes on the money we make, paying taxes on money we spend, and taxes on things we own that we already paid taxes on with already taxed money. I don't know who did that quote, but that's a great quote. Now, why haven't I heard of many of these strategies before? Well, it's because many investors rely too heavily on their CPAs, tax preparers for tax planning guidance. Many, if not most, CPAs are very good plug and play compliance officers. I just sent docs to my CPA today. He's really good at that. But they're not experienced tax planners. Tax planners are really expensive. They will cost you $2,500 per quarter or $2,500 per month or more to be fully engaged with tax planning. Most tax preparers, they just take your information, again, plug and play compliance officers, and they put it in the tax filings. Problem is everybody wants a tax planner at tax preparer prices, and it doesn't work that way. I'm connected with many CPAs. I'm connected with many tax planners, and there is a big difference. So let's talk about the capital gains tax rates. 0, 15, and 20%. Those are always subject to change at any time. One thing you need to understand about capital gains tax brackets is they are not progressive. Ordinary income taxes are progressive. So you're going to have some of your income at the lowest bracket, some of your income at the next bracket, and then the next bracket until you reach the highest bracket that you qualify for. In capital gains, if you hit the 20% bracket, all of it is at 20%. That is a surprise to many people. Also, the threshold to get into the 20% bracket right now is $600,050 for a married couple. So $600,050. Somebody will sell a property, they've got $500,000 in capital gains, they go, yay, we're in the 15% bracket. Well, how it works is they take your capital gains plus your income for the year. So if you have 120,000 of income plus 500,000 in capital gains, combined at 620,000, you've exceeded the $600,050 threshold. You are in the 20% bracket. And then you also have the net investment income tax, which is 3.8%. We call that Obamacare. And then there's the state capital gains taxes for most states, not all states that are out there. I live in California, in Silicon Valley until Sunday. We moved to Redding. And I tell people we pay a weather tax here. Well, where I'm moving to, we don't pay a weather tax. We just pay crazy high taxes. It gets really hot there. But here in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley, the weather is super nice and tax bills are high. So you add federal taxes, Obamacare, state taxes, then depreciation recapture. A lot of people don't realize this. Depreciation is a tax deferral mechanism, not a tax elimination mechanism. So let's say you depreciated your property $200,000 over the years, and you decide to sell and ride off in the sunset. Well, they're going to bill you 25% of that total depreciation. So you're going to now have a tax bill of $50,000 on top of the federal, the state, the Obamacare. And there's what's called a debt over basis tax. If you bought a property for $200,000, it became worth $1 million. You took out a loan for, say, $700,000 because you wanted to leverage the equity to go buy more real estate or whatever it is. If you did not put that money back into the improvements on the home, any debt that's higher than your cost basis can be taxed. So that's what they call the debt over basis tax. Now, tax law per a tax attorney is the only law that does not require constitutional due process. In other words, new tax laws can be made retroactive. So if they change the tax brackets in November of this year, they can go back to the first of the year. They can go back to when things were proposed. This was told to me by a friend of mine that was one of the attorneys that actually met with the IRS to help it create the 1031 exchange rules in the 1980s. IRS uh, talked to a handful of tax attorneys to create those rules. So be aware of that. Unfortunately, as incredible of a resource as he was, he passed away last year, and it's like, oh man, I mean, losing contact with somebody that was at the groundbreaking part of all the rules to the 1031s. It is sad to lose. He was a good guy too. Really good guy. Now, bad timing. Some of these strategies that are employed could have an issue of bad timing. Why is that? Tax code 453, that is your installment sale tax code. Owner carries structured installment sales, deferred sales trust. You you you're kicking the tax bucket down the road by creating an installment type of agreement to where you're going to get paid installments. So let's say you are looking to do an owner carry because you want to get from the 20% bracket down to the 15% bracket. We actually got somebody down to the 0% bracket. We spread it out enough, worked with their CPA. You think you're going from the 20 to 15% bracket. Then the tax brackets change. So now the top bracket's 28, the next bracket's 23. So instead of going from 20% to 15%, you go from 20% to 23%. You end up paying more in taxes instead of less. So you have to watch what is going on with the proposals at the time. Many owner carries are short term, especially on some of the commercial properties, 2, 3, 5 years. And so it's a little bit safer, but you need to be aware of that. And so some of these strategies, it could be bad timing. That's why it's important to coordinate any strategy with your tax professional. Another tax attorney that is licensed to go to tax court and defend her clients against the IRS in court taught me that everything is fact determinative. The legitimacy of a legal tax strategy is often based on how it's set up, how it's managed, how it's reported. That's where they get into the substance and form doctrine of taxes. One case can be allowed. So let's say a 1031 exchange is allowed following the tax code, but another 1031 exchange can be disallowed depending on how it was set up, how it was managed, and how it was reported. So everything is fact determinative. Just because something is legal doesn't mean you're going to get an automatic pass. It has to be done right. Okay, now we are finally onto the agenda for today. So I'm going to go over many strategies. Timing is the critical component here. Some of them have to be set up before closing. Some of them can be done within a 1031 exchange's 45-day identification period. You can rescue a failing exchange. How about after closing? I talked to somebody yesterday. They closed a property this year, and so they're expecting to pay the tax bill. And I said, well, there's some options to ease that gut punch. And then there are some diverse strategies that work either for capital gains or income taxes, even W-2, or a combination of the two. If you have a QR code reader, feel free to open it up because I will have my calendar link on a QR code at the end. All right, these have to be set up before closing. You have your traditional installment sale. I already talked about that a little bit. In a sense, the seller is the lender for the buyer. And let's say the buyer comes to an agreement with the seller to pay 10% a year for 10 years. So let's say it's $1 million property. They're paying 100,000 a year for 10 years. The seller is going to pay taxes on the 100,000 received. That's all they pay the capital gains on is what they receive. Constructive receipt. Whatever interest the seller charges, they're going to pay ordinary income taxes on that. So that's how that works. When the note gets paid off, so let's say you have 4 years at 10% and then a 60% balloon payment. There may be some strategies to take care of the balloon payment if you've already interacted and transacted in that manner and have a coming balloon payment. I can talk to some of the specialists to see if we can make it work for you. So again, people use this to many times to try and get into a lower tax bracket, but you have to look at the timing. Structured installment sales. In this case, the funds go from the closing title company or attorney, the closing agent, to a holding company, some different type of intermediary outside 1031 exchanges and an accommodator. That way, the client does not touch the funds. Because once they touch the funds, you have constructive receipt. And then there's a contract that structures the payments to come back to the seller. They could start years down the road. They could start immediately. One of the ways that is growing in popularity is doing this with an annuity. So the funds go to a holding company. The seller instructs the holding company on how long the annuity is going to be paid out, anywhere from 3 to 40 years. And then again, you just pay the taxes based on what you collected that year, capital gains and ordinary income taxes for the interest. If the gains exceed $5 million per person, so if you're married, $10 million, any tax deferral using tax code 453, the IRS requires you to pay interest on that deferral. So that's where you have to talk to tax attorneys. They may be able to put together a series LLCs to mitigate that. Now, with the annuity strategy, where there could be a problem is that the annuity cannot account for debt replacement. When you do an exchange, you have to replace debt with equal or greater debt. If you have a sale that's 200,000 debt, 800,000 equity, you're going to have to pay the taxes on the debt that's paid off, and you can put equity into the annuity. Deferred sales trust, also known as a DST. This gets confusing because you also have Delaware statutory trust as a DST. So if somebody says DST, I have to ask them, which one are you talking about? This is also a form of an installment sale using tax code 453. Proceeds can be used to purchase real estate, investment products, a business, and you pay proportionate taxes as you collect the installments. Some organizations want you to wait 5, 7, 10 years before you start collecting those installments. Why is that? Well, some people believe it's because the advisor now has more assets under management. And so, is that the case? Don't know. But they do have more assets under management for a longer time. And that's how they get paid. Now, there is a limitation. You have no control. For this to work, you are only a creditor of the trust. You're not an owner. So the third party trustee is the one that is in control of the funds and the investments. You can make recommendations. They may listen to you. They may not listen to you. And there's nothing you can do about it because of the nature of the law with this strategy. So it's arm's length. You are a creditor of the trust. You do not have decision-making power. Now it costs 1.5% of the first million up front and then 1.25% of everything over that million. And there's 1 to 1.5% annually for the management of that. If you invest in real estate with the funds in the DST, you actually get to start a whole new depreciation schedule. And for many of my clients that stay in real estate, that can work out because they've had properties for 20, 25 years and they're getting close to that 27.5 year limit. Many of the DST specialists I've talked to, they want to see at least 1 million in capital gains for it to make sense, from a numbers perspective, a management perspective, and all of that. This strategy can be used to also take care of a future balloon payment. So depending on how the contract was structured, the team would have to take a look at it. They may be able to utilize this for tax deferral on a balloon payment. Now, if you are in California, you have to deal with the California Franchise Tax Board. So if you set this up with your sale, they may require the title company, or if you're using this to rescue a failing exchange, the 1031 accommodator to withhold 3.3% of the total sales value. Again, being withheld to go to California Franchise Tax Board, you have to hope you get your money back the following year. Tax advantage corporations, or others call it LLC with charitable intent. This can be a great strategy for the sale of real estate, but you're talking 1 million, 1.3 million or higher is when it really starts to make sense. Or a business. So the minimum tax liability they say is or 100,000, but some of the groups they want to see it to be higher than that. This does work for RSUs, the restricted stock units. So if you know professionals, or if you as a professional are in the tech industry, like here in Silicon Valley, and other parts of the country, but here a lot of the wealth of these engineers is in their restricted stock units. And so we can use this to mitigate those taxes. So what happens here is you donate your asset or your business, you set up an LLC with charitable intent. You donate your asset or business to that LLC. You get a significant tax deduction for that donation in that year. The donor advised fund is a 98% member with no decision-making power, and you are the 2% member owner with 100% decision-making power. So now by doing it this way, any gains from a sale of assets, investments, you're going to pay 2% on the tax because that is your share of the ownership. Now, that money, so let's say $1 million goes into this LLC with charitable intent. That $1 million has to go to charity. But that's a problem. How do I get my money? I get it. You want to ride off in the sunset. You want your money. You want to go on those trips. Well, what they do is the team will work with you to set up a cash value life insurance policy. 2.5 to 5 times, sometimes 10 times more death benefit than the donation. So $1 million donation, let's say the life insurance is $5 million. By law, you can borrow from the LLC. So you can pull money out. Loan funds are not taxable. So you pull the money out to go do whatever it is you want, pay off your primary residence, buy a Tesla, whatever it is you want to do. The death benefit is the collateral of which you can get that loan. So when you pass away, the death benefit, part of it's going to go back to paying back that LLC so that $1 million gets paid. It's a fun strategy. And the reason why you're leveraging a higher death benefit is because if you're investing within that LLC and that's growing, that means that there's going to be more money that can be accessed. So you need a higher death benefit for the collateral. And the donation can be counted against 50% of your adjusted gross income in the year. So you can even do this if you have a W-2 income. Now, typically the attorney's fees range from $30,000 to $110,000 to set these up. We deal on the lower end. Mostly on the higher ends because the client may want a tax attorney opinion letter. And so they're going to pay a lot of money 50, 70, $100,000 for those opinion letters. This can be transactional, a sale of a business, or this can be used for multiple transactions. You can donate multiple assets into there and utilize this tax strategy. So again, you're going to pay 2% on the capital gains, and you'll have 100% control. And in some cases, you could possibly mitigate the taxes on a balloon payment with this as well. All right, the complex spendthrift trust. This is probably I would say, the most dynamic tool of all the tax tools I'm aware of. I use this myself. You can defer capital gains taxes for generations, passive income taxes from real estate, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. My trust owns my cryptocurrency. Um, Next year, I'll be investing in oil and gas mineral deeds. And so all of that passive income can be deferred, the taxes for generations. If you have a business, you can defer up to anywhere from 50 to 90% of your profits, your taxes, with a business trust. It also provides ironclad asset protection because spendthrift trusts are not subject to turnover orders by any court. It avoids probate upon death, much like a living trust, but I'll tell you this. Living trusts have what's called bloodline authority. You can determine what's going to be done with the assets after you pass away. These types of trusts don't have that bloodline authority. Once your beneficiaries become the trustees, they have full decision-making power. So that is one difference. They both deal with avoiding probate upon death, but the bloodline authority is an issue. And then the trust owns the assets while you're alive. Trust still owns the assets when you pass away. So there is no estate tax because the ownership hasn't changed. So some of my clients, especially those that get up into being worth 6 figure or 9 figures, 7, 8, 9 figures, this is really important to them because I've talked to a couple clients that the estate tax bill alone is going to be $40 or $50,000 or $40 to $50 million. That's huge, and that's a huge benefit. But all of these strategies have to be set up in advance of a close. You can set this up soon before closing. You got to give it a few weeks at least because no seasoning is required in order to do this. There's a way to reduce business debt at a much faster rate using these complex trusts, but I won't spend time there. Charitable trust. This is a means to eliminate capital gains taxes for any appreciated asset or business. The asset must be in the trust when it is sold. Investment properties can be a part of a charitable trust, and there is a significant tax deduction for donating an asset to the trust. However, you need to understand that there will be an appraisal that has to be done. It is required to have an appraisal. Why? Because the IRS has wisened up to the fact that we tend to overvalue assets when we donate. We tend to overvalue assets when we go to sell. I know this. Having closed 500 transactions in 10 years as a realtor, many times I walked into a house and people will tell me what they think the value is and they're way off 5 or 10%. Well, that could be a problem there, but if you're donating the asset and you think you have that value, they want an appraisal to make sure that it is true to value. With these charitable trusts, typically 10% has to go to charity. If you sell the asset and donate immediately to the charity, you have a charitable lead trust. If you wait until all funds are distributed and then the last 10% is paid out to charity, that's a charitable remainder trust. The cost, when you look at the numbers, the cost, you have the attorney's fees, and then you have to account for the 10% going to charity. Now, I tend to be a charitable person myself with our funds. I'm very active in my church. I give to God through my church. And so, this is a really good fit for those that want to do that. So even if the numbers are tight, they might already have a charitable intent in their lifestyle as it is. Proceeds are not fully liquid immediately. You have to wait at least a year. There's different formulas. 5 to 50%, so 2 to 20 years is how long for the funds to be paid out. Now you need to understand this. The charitable trust is eliminating the capital gains taxes. But if you are receiving money from that trust, that's coming to you typically as ordinary income taxes. So you have to really look at all of that. Now, if you have retired and you have the standard deduction, that might work to do that. So you have to talk to the attorney to make sure it's a good fit. Now, one of the limitations is all of the attorneys that I've talked to, except for one, has said that there has to be no debt on the property. I talked to one that was comfortable doing it as long as the debt had seasoned for at least 5+ years. And I've lost contact with that attorney, but I haven't met any others that said that. They typically say no debt. Now there are variations of the charitable trust. You have the remainder trust, annuity trust, remainder unit trust, the net income with makeup charitable remainder unit trust, the NIMCRUTs, charitable lead trust, lead annuity trust, lead unit trust, all kinds of trusts. Your trust attorney can walk you through those options. All right, now we're at the strategy that everybody is familiar with, or mostly familiar with. 1031 exchanges. You can defer capital gains taxes for as long as you own the real estate, and as long as the law applies, there can be a step-up basis for your beneficiaries, which could eliminate half or all of the capital gains taxes. Now I say half or all, depends on your state, and it depends on how your trust is set up. So you need to be aware of that. Go back, you need to talk to your tax professional. Now, how does that work? You bought a property for $200,000. You sell it for $1 million. You have $800,000 in capital gains you have to pay taxes on. Woohoo! IRS loves you. And then you have to call me. But if you bought it for $200,000 and you pass away and it's worth $1 million, if you are in a state that gets a full step up in basis, your beneficiaries inherit it as if they paid $1 million for it. So there's little to no tax by the time they sell it. That could be very valuable. That's the swap until you drop strategy that is talked about in the real estate world. Now, why would people keep swapping? Why not keep the same property? There is a problem known as trapped equity. Your values of real estate go up, rents go up. And what you want to do is you want to sell that property at a good value and buy another property at equal value where you can demand higher rents. So people, in the end, if they bought a property for $100,000 and they're making $10,000 a year on it, 10%, they're happy. Many years later, the property is worth $1 million. They're still making 10, or let's say they're making 20,000 a year in rent, and they're thinking, "Wow, I'm making a lot of money." Well, you're now at 2% because the value is at $1 million. So you got to understand that trapped equity thing. This cannot be set up after closing. I have talked to many people that have called me saying, "My funds are with the title company. I haven't touched them. I'd like to set up a 1031 exchange. Who do you work with?" And I have to tell them, "I'm sorry, but you can't do an exchange." "What do you mean? I haven't touched the money." You already have constructive receipt. The contract for a 1031 exchange has to be established in advance of closing. There has to be a contract in place for the qualified intermediary to receive the funds from the closing agent. So if you didn't do it by closing, it's too late. You have to replace with like-kind property of equal or greater value. Now, people get confused there. They think if they sell a single-family residence, they have to buy a single-family residence. So look at all this list here. And if you sell a single-family residence, you can go into all of these different classes of real estate. That's all considered like-kind, including mineral deeds. We're going to get into that. A lot of people don't know you can actually 1031 exchange and get oil and gas royalties as a way to ride off into the sunset. So what is not a like-kind property? Primary residences. You have the 121 exclusion of $250,000 per spouse. When the tax code was written, 1031 code in 1921, It was, I like your property, you like my home. Let's swap. If we do an exchange, no taxes. But that's not the case anymore. It's for investment properties. Now, understand this, and you need to talk to a tax attorney to make sure you do this right. If you've lived in a primary residence and you turn it into a rental for, let's say, 2 years to 3 years, when you go to close, as long as you have lived there 2 of the last 5 years, you can take the 121 exclusion out, the 250 per person, 250,000 per person, and exchange the rest. That is allowable. And I learned that from that tax attorney that helped to create the rules. Another thing that you can do is if you live there and you have an ADU that's rented out, or you rent out rooms, or you operate a business out of your home and you've been taking deductions for that part of the business, you can exchange that proportion, a proportionate amount of the real estate into whatever it is you want. If you just want the passive stuff, again, mineral deeds, Delaware statutory trust, something that might have mailbox money, but you can exchange part of your home and get the exclusion on the rest. Talk to a tax attorney or your CPA. Here's one thing about CPAs though. Good ones, bad ones, it doesn't matter. You ask 5 CPAs the same question, you get 7 answers. They don't agree on a lot of things. Why is that? Because the IRS doesn't even agree with itself from agent to agent. These IRS agents, you can have one come in and do an audit and everything looks good. Another one comes in the next year and says, "Oh, you got a problem." They're not consistent. So the CPAs, the tax professionals, they have to provide reasonable defense, is the term I keep hearing. So just be aware of that. Second homes may or may not qualify. Talk to your tax professional. Real estate flips and real estate developments do not qualify, but that's where you can set up those complex trusts and defer up to 90% of your income, which can be really helpful. Real estate investment trusts typically are a membership interest in a trust and not exchangeable because you have stock ownership and maybe $1 billion worth of real estate portfolio. If the REIT is considered real property and not a partnership interest, it may be exchangeable, but that is rare. Now, the investor has to replace debt with equal or greater debt. This is a shocker many times as well. Somebody has a relinquished property, had $300,000 worth of debt, 500,000 of equity. The 500,000 is now with the qualified intermediary, and they think that that's all they have to exchange. And then they're told, no, you have to replace the debt. You have to go out and get a loan for $300,000. And they're like, what? I've had those conversations. I said, yep, if you don't replace that debt with more debt or cash out of pocket, you're going to have to pay a proportionate amount of taxes. They call that mortgage boot. Other rules: 45 days to identify a property, 180 days to close. With those rules, and depending on market conditions, up to 40 to 60% of exchanges can fail. And that is a problem. Now, I'm going to give you a little insight. For those of you that do exchanges, those of you that are real estate professionals working with clients that do exchanges, intermediaries are not supposed to release the funds until the 46th day if you do not identify a property. But if you do identify a property, they're not supposed to release the funds till the 181st day. Not because they're trying to make money off of your money. It's because those are the rules. So if you identify a property and you do not purchase it, and all your money is there with an accommodator, you're going to have to wait an extra 135 days. So I always recommend, do not identify a property until you have it under contract. Because if you identify a property and you go write an offer and you lose to another party that wants that house and was willing to pay more, you now identified, automatic 181st day before you can get your money. So identify the property first. I mean, get the property under contract first, then identify it still within the 45 days to increase the chances that you're not going to have to deal with it. Private family foundations, like public charities, are dedicated to carrying out charitable intent. Um, Private family foundations are funded by your own personal wealth, your business, so it's privately funded. You've probably heard of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, although Melinda, I don't think is a part of that anymore. Walton Family Foundation, Coca-Cola Family Foundation. Um, so these foundations can address income taxes, capital gains taxes, and estate taxes. The key to the foundations is that you have to have legitimate charitable intent with your resources. You'll find that many of those professional athletes that make lots and lots of money, they have foundations and they're out in the community doing camps and doing stuff for the homeless and whatnot, and they're utilizing funds from their um, private foundation that they are funding. It can eliminate capital gains taxes, but typically there's a nominal excise tax. I believe it's still at 1.39%. The tax deduction that you get for donating the asset to the foundation can count against 20 to 30% of one's adjusted gross income for the year of giving to the organization, depending on the rules. That varies. Business sales. There is a wonderful tax benefit for those that have qualified small business stock. You need to talk to a tax attorney. I won't spend much time here, but if you do qualify, you have a $10 million exemption. So the first 10 million is not even taxable, or 10 times the cost, the adjusted cost basis. So that's a huge benefit, but you have to talk to a tax attorney to make sure it works for you. All right, those within a 1031 exchange's 45-day identification period, you're looking to ride off into the sunset. You want mailbox money. And in many cases, you're looking for a step up in basis. Delaware Statutory Trusts, DSTs. These are securities regulated investments, and it's a more settled tax solution. There's an IRS ruling from 2004. That's hard to come by. The IRS doesn't want to make rulings. They don't want to give opinions, although they'll give an opinion when they disallow your tax strategy in an audit, but they don't want to put a lot of things in writing. They will like to keep things in the gray. So the tax attorney that taught me about everything being fact determinative, she said most of it's in the gray. Very little case law out there. And the IRS likes it in the gray. So you have to be on top of it and how it's getting done. Right. So you have fractional interest in a property, typical minimum investment around $50,000. And here you generate mailbox money plus appreciation. So you exchange into a property. It can count for your debt replacement. They already have the debt in place. So if you have a 50% debt on this asset you're selling, you go into DST with 50% debt. That counts as debt replacement. So be aware of that. Then you have appreciation. This is passive income. They have the management in place. These are securities regulated, and by the way, as I understand it, um, they have to show their track record. So if they're not making money for their clients, they actually have to disclose that. So it helps as you look into the DSTs to see who is good to work with and who is not. The cost to set up a DST ranges 8 to 15%. They're managing it. So if you're already used to paying property managers, then you'll understand that. You can exchange into and out of a DST, but you don't have to do that. You can actually invest with cash into DSTs. Many people do that. Now, here's where things get to be a little bit of fun. You can do a 1031 exchange into a Delaware statutory trust. You have to hold it 2 years so that the IRS will not disallow that exchange. After 2 years, if the DST sponsor that you exchange into, you have fractional ownership in, has a real estate investment trust and allows you to do this, you can do an UPREIT, or what they call a 721 exchange, into a real estate investment trust. The beauty of this strategy is that you've gone from real estate to stock ownership in real estate, and you can sell off stock as you would like. So if you want to go on a European trip or a big long cruise or lots of ice cream for the grandkids or whatever it is, you can sell off stock each year. And they may do it quarterly or annually, however they have that set up. But you go from the real estate to a real estate portfolio with stock, and then you can sell it off as you would like. You have to pay the proportionate taxes, but for many of my clients, that's fine. So that's a great way to go. Limitation. You have to be an accredited investor. So how do you get there? 1 million in investments outside of your primary residence. So if you have $1 million investment property and 300,000 of debt service on it, you have 700,000 of equity. You have 700,000 that counts. And then you need 300,000 from your stocks, bonds, mutual funds, IRA accounts, 401k accounts, coin collections, gun collections, shoe collections, anything that has collector's value. Or you have an income of 200,000 adjusted gross income as a single person or 300,000 as a married couple. So either way works. You don't have to qualify on both sides of that. Mineral rights. Oh yeah. This is where it gets to be a lot of fun. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight here because you might have heard some tragic stories. So I'll talk a little bit about that. If done correctly, mineral rights can qualify for utilizing 1031 exchange funds. It is because a deed is included in the purchase, so you're going after mineral deeds. This can create a higher return on investment in many cases. So this can be really, really valuable. It does not qualify for debt replacement. DSTs can do debt replacement. Here, it has to be cash only. So in some cases, it may be that depending on the nature of the sale, part of it goes to a DST to take care of the debt replacement, which still requires some of the equity going into there, and then the balance of equity going to mineral deeds. So that's where you have a layered strategy. So you could buy stocks in oil and gas. Most of the people that I've talked to over the years when I was learning about this were buying into equipment. It takes 10 to 15 million dollars to drill a well. So people will come in with a minimum of $100,000 investment. And with that, they would get an $85,000 tax deduction. And then with that well, if it produces oil, they're going to have profits coming from that. So you get the tax deduction and profits. That is a little bit more speculative in risk because sometimes all you end up is with a tax deduction because it did not get any oil or it produced very little. And I'll tell you, in my world, it's not worth it to spend $100,000 to save $35,000 on taxes. And I'd rather just keep the money, pay the tax, and have 65,000 still in my pocket. So, so there's some risk, but there may not be risk. It could produce oil for 15, 20, 25 years, but it's one well. Now, when you deal with mineral deeds and mineral rights, it's very different. 3 of my clients 2 weeks ago decided to move forward with this strategy. They're buying into the mineral rights on 640 acres. That 640 acres out in the Permian Basin, largest basin in the US, possibly the world, it's arguable there, has 2 old wells. Drip, drip, drip. Not a whole lot of income there. It has 8 new wells that have started to produce. And they have 8 PUDs, what they call proven and undeveloped. So they know the oil is there. They're not ready to drill yet, but soon. So you have 8 new wells. You're going to have 8 upcoming wells, so 16 wells to produce. And when this happens, the group I work with, the lead guy that I talk to, he's been doing this 25 years. They've never had a client lose money, and they usually see clients getting all of their money back in 3 to 4 years. Because when you put in the new wells,
Hi, everyone. I think the video was frozen here for Scott, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here real quick for him. Hopefully, he'll join in. I think he's coming. There you are. Hi, Scott.
hey, internet dropped me. I don't know if they had to deal with anything with the cords here.
Oh,
PJ's.
no.
So, all right, I'm on my hotspot.
Wonderful.
All right. So let me ask you, did I already talk about, did you catch all the mineral rights?
Yes, I think it was really like the last 3 minutes, so a little more on the mineral rights, I think, if you could go back.
Yeah, okay. So one thing about mineral rights is it doesn't qualify for debt replacement. So you have to do equity only. So you can combine that with the DST. And the real value is when you're doing mineral deeds. So my clients 2 weeks ago, three different clients decided to move forward. They were excited about a property that was 640 acres, two old wells, not a whole lot producing, eight new wells that are producing, and eight that are in the works to be drilled. So basically, they're going to have the mineral rights on 16 wells. Now, and it doesn't account for possible future wells. We don't know. 640 acres. It's a lot of acreage there. So they're going to have strong income. And typically, according to the team I work with, the investors get their money back in 3 to 4 years typically. Because when you invest, when there's new wells, that first year, a lot of pressures create more income. So that's different than investing in the equipment where you're investing in one well and there's more speculation. Here, they already have oil producing, there's already income, and there's expecting more in the plans. Forbes wrote an article, and in that article, they said that there are somewhere between 12 million and 15 million mineral owners, which is huge. People are building their wealth this way. And in Texas, so I have my real estate license in Texas, so I came across this quite a bit. Mineral rights owners subsurface supersede surface rights owners. So if somebody builds a house on 50 acres, want to have a nice quiet place. The people who own the mineral rights can choose to put a well in, and that person does not have the ability to stop it because mineral rights supersede surface rights. Just a little insight. Tenant in common. These are securities regulated. You have co-ownership with other investors with proportionate ownership of commercial real estate. You can exchange into and out of a TIC, but it's not required to do exchanges. You have direct ownership in real estate, and you have passive income. Management terms are put in place. Limitation, unanimity of all owners in decision making. Now, I've been married 36 years. We don't always agree, so we have to compromise. You add a third, a fourth, a fifth person, a 10th person. It gets tougher. It could take 3 years just to decide on the color of the paint on the exterior of the building. That's a problem. So here's an example. There was a group that was selling their property, and the last counter offer from the buyer came in, and all of the owners except for one liked the offer. The one that didn't like it said, "I'm not going to sign unless I make this much money." All of the other owners had to give up $200,000 a piece each to satisfy the one. That's a lot of control. So be aware of that. Rescuing a failing exchange. There is a tax management memorandum by an attorney out of San Francisco, or at least he was a while ago, talking about how to transition funds from tax code 1031 to tax code 453. Critical point is if you want to try to do that, you have to have an accommodator that will cooperate. Most accommodators don't cooperate. You have to find a specialist that does. You can do structured installment sales to rescue a failing exchange, not a failed. If you're outside of those 45 and 180-day periods, it's failed. So if you are at the 50th day and you did not identify a property, it's failed. So you have to identify a property, and now it's considered a failing exchange because you're beyond that and you can't buy it. So a structured installment sale could work, deferred sales trust can work, but the key is that you have to have an 1031 accommodator that is willing to cooperate. That's where it's good to have conversations with somebody like me in advance to set you up for more success. After closing, but no 1031 exchange, I have a little fun with this. People will call me and go, I closed on my property. I've got this much in gains. What do I do? And my first response is typically cry. And then I say, okay, we've got options. Qualified opportunity zones, the big beautiful bill just extended that benefit. So, because it was getting to be where it wasn't a benefit at all anymore because we were too close to when taxes get paid. But, I'm going to rush through the last parts of this presentation. You need to understand this. If you have 300,000 in capital gains on a sale today and you decide to do an opportunity zone, you still have to pay the tax on that 300,000 of gains, but you're going to defer it. Now with the BBB Act, they're going to allow you to defer it for 5 years, and that's when it gets paid. And hopefully you'll have some income from the project, the Qualified Opportunity Zone project, to account for that tax bill. So you're deferring it for a time. Then if you've invested it and you hold it into that 300,000 into the opportunity zone for at least 10 years, then you're federally tax-free on the growth as long as it's in there 10 years. The state may choose to cooperate or not cooperate. California does not cooperate. The monies have to be invested in the opportunity zone fund within 180 days, but I've talked to tax professionals that said if it was an LLC, they can extend that for a time. You have to be an accredited investor. And you do this separate from a 1031 exchange, although I heard recently somebody saying, hey, if you have a failing exchange, we can put the funds in there into an opportunity zone. Yeah, I would talk to a tax attorney about that. Charitable gifts and annuities. You could donate your asset to a charity. They sell it. They buy an annuity, so you get tax deduction for part of it, and then they buy an annuity and create an income stream with the other part of that. It's better to take the cash after the sale because with an asset, you can only count it against 30% of your adjusted gross income. If it's cash, it can count against 60% of your income. Charitable remainder trust, I've already talked about that. You could donate a good chunk of money to a charitable trust. Capital gains and/or income tax options. Woohoo, we're getting close. Some strategies can be applied to capital gains taxes, income taxes for business owners, or W-2 income. And if you're hearing any chaos, it's because we were expecting to be in Reading already, and now we're having to deal with all the moving now. Because they delayed the closing 2 weeks. The minimum tax bill, depending on the strategy, can range from 25,000 to 200,000. So just set up time on my calendar. Yeah, federal tax credits. A lot of people don't know this. One of the goals of the tax code is to reward desired behavior. So if the government wants private funding in a certain arena, they create tax credits. So if they want private funding for sovereign tribes, the Indian tribes, they create tax credits. If they want more private funding for solar, they create tax credits. So that's how they reward desired behavior. So those conspiracy theorists out there, well, this is where, yes, you are correct. Now, tax credits are a dollar for dollar deduction. So $100 saves you 100 in taxes versus a deduction where $100 saves you $35 in taxes. So it's very different. And what you want to do is look for leverage strategies where maybe 70, 80, 90 cents on the dollar. So $70,000 gets you a $100,000 tax credit. So it saves you $30,000. So you want to look at that. So each year, new opportunities come up. And so that's where this is the time of year where I'm having lots of conversations to see what's out there. You also have leverage deduction strategies. This can work for W-2 income as well as capital gains, business income, where you take, well, these can work in the higher brackets. The 24% bracket may or may not work, but really the top three brackets, $50,000 can become a $200,000 or $250,000 charitable tax deduction. So it's leverage 4 or 5 to 1. So that is really valuable. That typically counts against 30 or 50% of your adjusted gross income, depending on the nature of the strategy. And if you bought more, because there's typically a $50,000 minimum, if you can't use it all in that 1 year, you could carry it forward up to 5 years. There's Section 179 equipment depreciation. Many high income earners do this, where they'll buy equipment of some sort. It could be a box house, ADU type of house. It could be tractor equipment, luxury cars that are leased out, Class B or C RVs. There's a lot of different opportunities out there. Airplanes, and they'll buy it with 10, 20, 30% down and do debt for the rest of it, but they get the full tax deduction. They get to depreciate the 100%. Sometimes, depending on the year, it could be 70%. So in that range in there. So they get a huge tax deduction. Here's one thing. You have to actually put a certain amount of hours into that business in a year to qualify for that. So you have to be aware that there are time obligations to get that tax deduction. Cost segregation is accelerated depreciation. So you have subcomponents of your building that you depreciate at an accelerated rate. It could be wiring, light fixtures, plumbing, flooring, fences, things that don't last 27 and a half or 39 years. So you increase the depreciation taken in that year. And what that can do is it can reduce your income taxes. So if you sell a real estate property, you might be able to, by lowering your income taxes on your rental income on other properties, lower the tax bracket you are in. There are tax credits for research and development for businesses. Reach out to me if you have a business that's in manufacturing, technology, and I'll set you up to inquire on that. Then there's a non-tax tax strategy. You sell the asset. You're one of those that don't want long-term commitments and obligations and tax filings and all of that. Well, what you could do is maybe do a short-term tax credit and then take some of the rest of the funds and put it into an annuity that has a signing bonus of 10, 20, 30, 40% in one day. So 100,000 becomes 110 or 120 or 140,000 in one day. That is not going to be cash. You can't cash that out immediately. That'll be applied to a future lifetime income. But when you take a step back and look at your estate value, if you've done a credit and you got a bonus, after you pay the taxes, it doesn't look like as much of a hit. So what do we look at? Numbers, goals, and personality. The numbers have got to fit. Tax strategies cost money most of the time. So the tax bill's got to warrant that. I've turned people away from strategies because of that reason. Goals. Your goals have got to fit the strategy. Some people want to pay off a primary residence. Well, that may eliminate a few of the strategies. Whatever those goals are, has to be considered. Got to look at things holistically. And then there's personality. Some people would rather just pay the tax. They know it's a gut punch, not have those long-term obligations, but that's how they sleep. Others would leverage everything that they can to defer every penny that they can. Problem is many times they look at the first person and go, "You're an idiot for paying those taxes." No, it's not a maturity of thinking issue. It's a personality thing. Everybody's different. So got to look at it holistically. Layer of strategies. We'll skip that. If you got a QR code, go ahead and pull it up. I'll skip that. All right. There's my calendar link. I'm going to stop the share now. I'm going to reshare it. 3 QR codes there. There's my Facebook page. There's a calendar link. Actually, quite often there's articles from AOA on my Facebook page. There's my calendar link. Those consultations are always free. And then I also have an education platform. We have over 100 recordings now. And then after I get settled in and Reading, after our move, we're going to add a lot more recordings where I'm interviewing different professionals on the tax side, the estate planning side, reverse mortgage side. I already have videos in there on that. So feel free to take a look at that. And that said,
Yeah.
I'm done.
Great. Well, I've even been interviewed for the education platform. So very helpful if you guys want more of that ongoing. I also put up a poll question in case for some reason some of you can't do the QR code scan right now. You could say yes to the poll question. That will also generate an email for you to coordinate with Scott time to talk. So I see a lot of you are taking advantage of that. That's awesome. So go ahead and say yes there or scan the QR code either way. Let's get to a few questions. I know we're a little over on time, so if you can stick around, great. If you can't, reminder that we are recording it, so you can always look back at the recording. We're going to send it to you tomorrow with the slides. So if you do need a run, I understand, but we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So Scott, the first question here from Paul, he's saying, if I do a sale with $400,000 of capital gains, and I buy 4 DSTs, I'm assuming Delaware statutory trusts, at $100,000 each, and then I liquidate one of the DSTs, does that affect the other 3 investments?
No, you're just going to pay the taxes on the one that you liquidate.
Okay. And it's not easy sometimes to liquidate, I'll add.
You want to work with a team that actually has secondary market buyers if you want to do it sooner.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, because yeah, you have to find a person who would want to take it, right?
Right.
Next one here is Nick. Does that deferral strategy of donating apply if you donate to a charitable foundation?
You can donate to a charitable foundation and get the tax deduction up front. I don't deal with the foundation stuff. I have a colleague that does. But yeah, you can donate and you will get a tax deduction. With the foundations, the charitable deductions are not as strong, but charitable trust and other types of charitable structures, you get a higher deduction for that. Now,
Okay.
foundations do require that you engage in the work as well. So there's extra rules. And my clients, actually, after 9 years, I still haven't had one go into a foundation.
Hmm. Interesting. Also, Celia was asking on Delaware statutory trusts, you said it's not worth it unless capital gains are more than $1 million.
That's on the deferred sales trust. So that's a different DST. That's the deferred sales trust. Delaware statutory trust, you need to qualify by having $1 million of investments or enough income. But the deferred sales trust, and that's where it gets confusing because they are both DSTs. The deferred sales trust, the tax code 453 with the installment code, most of them want to see 1 million to 1.3 million in gains to make it worth it. And actually, I still have yet to have somebody do a deferred sales trust because in the end, they want the control, and deferred sales trusts do not allow them to have control.
Hmm. Dobie is asking if I identify a property for a 1031 exchange before the 45th day, but it doesn't close, can I identify another property and use the 1031 funds?
Nope. You have 45 days to identify, and this is why a lot of exchanges fail. Something happens, they get it in there, 40th day, they do inspections and they find out I'm not going to buy this, but you're on the 50th day. If the accommodator is playing by the rules, they're going to have to say, nope, it's too late. Midnight of the 45th day is the last identification.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, they're really strict on it. I think the only exception we ever saw was during the pandemic. So, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Lucia,
Yeah,
Lucia, mhm.
and in Southern California with those fires and whatnot, the government will allow for extensions for 6 months or a year, depending on tragic situations. So in different areas.
Yeah. But you don't want to rely on that. Lucia is saying here, is there a concern about the trustee who is holding the funds for 5 years? What if they go out of business or they go bankrupt?
That's a great question. I haven't seen that done. There's not a lot of deferred sales trust organizations out there. Um, but that that's a good question. I don't know
Yeah.
what would happen with that. But typically you're working with an organization, and attorneys and whatnot. So I don't know what the risks are or how much chances that are. They would
Mm,
probably bring in a new advisor because your funds are invested. They're
right. They're
not just
not going to
somebody's.
disappear
Yeah,
necessarily.
yeah.
Uh-huh. But who manages it is the question if that were to happen, although it's very unlikely, but it's a good question. Deborah says, are you familiar with how to use a CRUT to minimize capital gains on crypto? Or do you know of any other ways of minimizing capital gains on crypto?
You ought to set up a time with me. So
Okay.
that's the charitable remainder trust, unity trust. Um, Charitable structures, a lot of people, especially here in Silicon Valley, use those charitable trusts to mitigate the taxes on the crypto. So, but there are other options there that might provide better means of saving money because see, when you start pulling that out, that becomes ordinary tax to you. So you want to pull that out and go buy a house, you could get hit with an ordinary income tax bill. So yes, the trust itself eliminated the taxes, but when it comes to you, because see, that's playing both sides. You're getting the deduction for the charity, and then you're getting the money. The IRS is saying, "Oh no, 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 we're not going to let you save on taxes and get to go play with the money, with no consequence."
Mm,
So, so yeah, so there's other structures that could work. The
good.
structure I have absolute control as a trust. I don't get a tax deduction for donating it. I have to sell the crypto at basis. So whatever I paid for, I sold it to the trust. And then when the trust sells it, it automatically gets tax deferral as long as you do not pay credit or distribute to a beneficiary. And so I can put that into my house. I could buy a car with it as long then the trust owns it. So it has a lot more flexibility.
Mm. That's a good one. Kai, maybe worth setting up for some of you. Kai here is asking, which types of trusts allow you to donate a property with a high loan to value, like 75%? Hmm.
For charitable, doesn't mean that there aren't attorneys out there that will allow for it, but on the charitable types of structures,
Oh, Scott, I think your
they
signal
don't
is
they
is
don't
in and
care.
out
They want it to
here.
be. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and maybe that might help with the bandwidth.
Okay. So yeah, the with the charitable structures, when you donate, uh, all of it, all of the attorneys I've talked to, all the professionals I've talked to, except for one, they want it to be free and clear of debt. So I'm not sure what's out there. However, the trust that I have, again, you don't donate it. You can sell the asset to the trust at cost basis or book value. And when it sells, then the debt's paid off and the balance of equity goes into the trust. So you can do that. Like I said before, it's the most dynamic tool I found.
A fellow Alexandra asks, what are the problems with reverse 1031 exchange? Buy first, sell after. What happens if you don't get sale?
You buy and you don't sell your other property, you end up with a failed exchange. So now you own two properties. That happens
More
fairly
than,
often.
yeah.
So you got to be super confident that when you buy that property, you're going to be able to get that other one closed within 180 days. And the other downside is it's a lot more expensive. You might pay $1,000 to do your traditional exchange, $10,000 to do a reverse exchange.
Yep. Uh, Deborah asking also, I have a business and a 501c3. How much of my business income can I donate?
It, okay, here's where it gets tricky. I'm just going to say, I'll say it this way. Talk to a tax attorney. When you set up a 501c3 and you are running that, if you're the one managing that and you are moving income into there for the tax savings, the tax deductions, the IRS starts getting concerned about self-dealing. So if you're going to take money from a business and get a tax deduction, you donate it to a charity that you do not have management responsibilities in or ownership of. Otherwise, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. But talk to a tax attorney. There may be ways that I'm not aware of, but I have to watch what's going on with the IRS with the dirty dozen list and the listed transactions list. And quite often, the strategies that get people into trouble is when they start doing all these charitable structures that the IRS says you are self-dealing. You're the one still benefiting in the end.
Mm, I
So,
see.
so just be aware. So talk to a tax attorney. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying make sure you have full backing and maybe even a tax attorney opinion letter.
Yeah, good advice. Michael says, what if a DST stops paying? Is there a tax deduction you can take?
It's a good question. That I don't know. But you have to make sure that you do your homework, due diligence. Fortunately, DSTs are required to show their track record. DSTs can not pay, you know, especially if you have a large single tenant and they go into bankruptcy or something like that. So there have been bad DSTs and there have been really great DSTs. You got to do your homework. But yes, if it stops paying, you have to talk to your CPA as to whether or not there's any tax
Mhm.
benefits.
Yeah. Alexandra also asking here, does a failed reverse exchange involve any restriction on releasing the deed on the purchased property?
That's getting into some that's way above my pay grade. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that might be best answered by maybe, I would think like a qualified intermediary, perhaps. What do you think, Scott?
I think that would be the case, and I am not a qualified intermediary. I
Yeah.
read out.
Well, it's great because actually, I think next week we're going to have a qualified intermediary talk. So stick
Awesome.
around for that one, Alexandra. We're going to send the invite to the next webinar next week on that. I have another one here from Rick. What is the cost of setting up a trust based on? Is the cost based on the amount of money or the complexity or something else?
So it depends on the type of trust. If you're talking about the kind of trust that I have, it will be based on the complexity. Because you have a base level of cost of the trust. A lot of times 30, 35 grand. And some of my clients, I have one that had over 100 properties that we
Oh,
had to
wow.
look at. But then I have one that has nine properties, but that's 82 million, with the nine properties. Somebody could have 50 properties worth a total of 15 million, so, but it requires more work because you have a lot more properties, you have a lot more bills of sales and everything else you have to deal with. So the attorney's fees for charitable trusts are going to be also based on the complexity.
Mm. Okay, good to know. And last question, I think it's a great one, Sukhdev. I'm in the middle of a 1031 exchange and would like some help with that. So we went over how to get in contact with Scott and set up an appointment. If Scott, if you want to share your screen one last time, Sukhdev, you can scan that QR code. The poll, I finished the poll, but if you scan the QR code or if you haven't already said yes, you can do that.
And
Yep,
what I'll
there it
do here
is.
real quick, what I'll do here real quick too is some of us, those of us that are of that age that go to bed and wake up injured, um, are not QR code people. And in case that's the case, I'm now going to put my link in the chat
In the
box.
chat. Oh, amazing. Yes. So we'll do the link. Go to the chat, guys. If you want to copy paste that link or just click on it to go to the site and schedule a time with Scott. Thank you so much. So we're gonna end it here. Thanks for sticking around. And Scott, like always, we hear new strategies, new advice here on really, I don't even know if I'd call it advice as much as like ideas, like, because ultimately we're making the decision, right? It's what works best for us. And I really like your approach to it. And again, thank you for sticking around and answering so many questions. I'm sure you'll get a lot of people who will want to set up time with you. You're really generous for offering that. And I appreciate your time always.
Oh, you're welcome. And I always enjoy doing this with you guys. So it's a blast. All right. I hope
Wonderful.
everybody has a wonderful rest of your day. And I look forward to meeting with anybody that wants to set up time.
Okay. All right, everyone. Take care. Till next time. Bye.